It's become almost cliche to act like we're relieved that 2020 is finally over. But will 2021 be any better? Hello, I'm Ryan McMakin, a senior editor with the Mises Institute. And on this episode of Radio Rothbard, we'll be making predictions about what's in store for 2021. With me today is Associate Editor Tho Bishop, and we'll each bring our top 3 predictions for 2021, ranging from Bitcoin to foreign policy. So let's get right to it. All right, with number 1, I say that the debate will rage over the effects of lockdowns and vaccines. So obviously this issue isn't going away. However, there will be an added part of this, which will be, okay, well, what effect are the vaccines having on the course of the disease running? Because, of course, it's not like everybody's just going to line up one day and get a vaccine, and then we can easily attribute to that any decline in the disease that occurs from now on. The problem, I think, for the regime is that it will continue to be debatable either way. I think in their minds, what they want is to make sure that everyone gets vaccinated before the disease runs its course, as these pandemics always do, over about a 12 to 18 months period. You look back at over the last 100 years, and that's how it goes. There's 2 big bumps. It lasts about a year and a half, and then things quickly return to relative normality. It's true that even after the 1958-59 flu pandemic, that you still had people dying from the disease in 1960, but not really a big bump at that point. It was still out there. It was still a problem for people, but it wasn't what you would call a working pandemic of sorts, where people were affected by it and where you had noticeably elevated numbers of deaths. And I think what's likely to happen with this is it's not going to have this clear cutoff where, well, everybody's vaccinated and that explains the decline of the disease in 2021. It's much more likely to be spotty, to be phased in places, and the reality, of course, is that it will be going down already anyway. And maybe you're already seeing that with declining cases, and deaths may have peaked in this current peak, and of course we're right in the middle of what's traditionally flu season, although there's not a lot of that going on. But it's unclear how exactly that will proceed, but it will remain highly debatable whether the vaccines were the driving force behind a decline in the disease that might occur in 2021, because they're simply not going to be able to roll it out the way that they would like to ideally. So that debate will just simply continue. People are going to say, well, it would have gone into decline anyway. The people who are proponents of lockdowns and mandatory vaccines and so on will insist that that's the only way that we can ever return to normal, and that things would have been far, far worse without the vaccines. The question is, how many people are going to buy that argument? I think you're going to have a lot of gaslighting going on. A lot of people will be looking at the curves, at the lack of correlation between mask wearing and decline in deaths, between lockdowns and the decline in deaths. Can we place any real causality in any of those places? And if you just look at the data, that doesn't appear clear at all. So what you've got are just both sides claiming whatever they can about whatever correlations may exist. And that's not going to lead to any particular agreement. And I think you're already seeing, of course, the pushback have some success, right? By any standard that the lockdown people invented for themselves back in March, April, and May, we would now be in week 6 of another severe stay-at-home order lockdown period. But it became pretty clear that in most places, unless you're outside of deep blue, truly fanatical lockdown places, that, I mean, take Colorado, for example, they're clearly not willing to try it again, even though the Democrats are in charge, even though cases and deaths are far above what they were back in March and April. They're afraid that if they try, people aren't going to abide by it. And that would be humiliating for the regime then, to order a stay-at-home order, and then everybody's just out doing whatever they want anyway. Certainly here, a lot of church organizations are emboldened by federal rulings on that, so church isn't going away. And I think that's what 2021 is going to be about. It's going to be about just everybody making their own claims about what were the results of all of these public policies. And it's just going to be a matter of who can gaslight the most on the part of the regime, and who can really win any converts at all, if possible, to their side. But I think the reality also is that people will just become more and more comfortable with whatever the new realities are, and just start seeing other people in person again. And yes, they're probably going to still be afraid to go to any dense gathering of 1,000 people and so on, but that's a fairly small amount of what people are doing. And this is going to fade to a certain extent into the background, but the larger issue is going to be, how do we justify the lockdowns and any measure of mandatory vaccine policy that we can put into place?
Well, and I think some of the dynamics here that are going to be interesting, particularly watching the access of corporate power trying to failures at the explicit state level of doing like mandatory vaccination. I think seeing the way that corporations end up trying to leverage their influence on forcing vaccines on the people. Are you going to be able to fly? Are you going to be able to go to concerts? If you don't have a vaccine card, I mean, this is something that I know has been talked about on lots of social media, so I don't think it's going to be a particularly novel point to our audience in particular, but I think that's going to be something, and I think that goes to some of these larger interesting trends with big tech and whatever. And one of the things that I think could really make a Biden administration a lot scarier than even like Obama just 4 years ago is that explicit intersection between, woke corporate power and a Biden administration full of these people. I think the federal government is perhaps going to be even more powerful, significantly more powerful, rather than this kind of creeping mission creep that we've seen, for about 100 plus years. I think that's something that's going to be really interesting to watch. And again, I'm just glad that that might kind of play into our second prediction here, is that seeing this continuing push, the different state approaches here. I'm so very happy to be living in the free state of Florida, that able to provide some of those counterfactuals to the California examples and things like that. There probably would be a lot less differences in the way that vaccine is doled out. I know DeSantis has done what some of the other states are not doing, and really prioritizing age over, say, first responder, things like that. That's going to be interesting to see the way that plays out. But some of those the consequences and the importance of that federalist kind of decentralized approach to COVID. I think that 2021 is going to continue to show why that is very important, which again plays to all sorts of great content that we have on Mises.org.
Well, this brings us to number 2. And this is your prediction that blue state bailouts will be a major partisan battleground in Congress.
Yes, and I said, and this is one of the reasons why I am optimistic might be the wrong word, but I'm very interested, and I think that the mainstream political conversation is coming more Mises Institute friendly by the day, because I think you're really going to see state divisions really start to present themselves with the combination of, again, the continuing fallout from lockdowns of vaccines. I mean, we didn't even get into the economic consequences, right, of all the intervention at the federal level. Still the battles raging over $2,000 checks, et cetera. So the financial side of it, the consequences of these blue state budgets that were totally mismanaged long before COVID, obviously, never let a crisis go to waste. They're going to try to use COVID to get federal tax dollars to bail out their bad mistakes and bail out their pension programs and things like that. I mean, I think that's one of the interesting things about this whole $22,000 check ballot is that, in theory, we should not be really thinking about this in terms of stimulus, right? We should be thinking about it in terms of reparations for these innocent business owners being screwed over by their state governments. They're the ones, more than the federal government, right, responsible for shutting these things down. If we had a sane world rather than the clown world that we're living in, it should be state governments that should be forced to cut reparations checks to their victims here. But of course, you can't really do that because, again, a lot of these state budgets are so out of whack. And one of the things I think is going to be interesting from a purely political party end is that you're going to continue to see states like Florida and Texas really take this pronounced position as the defenders of the Republican Party versus New York City, or New York State and California, in terms of very big personalities in the Senate level. I mean, Rick Scott is already geared up for this fight. Marco Rubio is trying to prove that he's not so little for his future presidential ambitions. Ted Cruz never misses a chance to take up a microphone. Corbyn, I don't, less of a fighter. And meanwhile, you're going to have all sorts of personalities in these blue states trying to bail themselves out. So I think there's a lot at that bailout level that is going to create some very interesting narratives that I think is really going to end up being one of the focal points in terms of Washington politics next year.
Well, this lack of unity, of course, is a bit relevant to my next prediction, which is number 3, which is that the U.S.'s relative geopolitical power will continue to decline. Now, it's not 1945 anymore. It's not 1960. There's not this domestic Cold War consensus where everyone could agree that the U.S. should have a huge role in the world in terms of containing communism or winning over third world countries to the U.S.'s side and so on. That's all gone. Yes, that sort of thing is definitely still an issue that for neoconservatives and for mostly or even really the Democratic Party now, which continues to be stuck in about 40 years ago in terms of foreign policy. But the reality is far beyond Trump, far beyond Biden. As much as people try to blame Trump for this, the fact is that the U.S.'s relative economic power is in decline. And that translates also into less geopolitical power. Now, this is different from a precipitous decline, like a real decline. So this doesn't mean the U.S. is actually becoming poorer. But what it does mean is that that gap between a lot of these other countries that the U.S. used to be far ahead of, and which basically used to be irrelevant internationally, that's no longer the case. That what you've got are a bunch of middle-income countries that are moving even out of the middle income, that are becoming influential and can form meaningful international groups that can meaningfully oppose United States policy in other places. And of course, the big important country in terms of this is China. Now, I'm not one of these people that thinks that China is it really poses any sort of real competition for the U.S. in terms of being the most dominant country worldwide. However, China does pose a real problem, a real challenge for the U.S. regime. Note that I'm speaking in terms of the U.S. regime. I don't think these things pose a real problem for Americans per se. However, for the regime is likely, for sure, to be limited in the Far East, that the days of being a global hegemon are coming to an end. I don't think this is going to happen in 2021 in its terms of its final fruition, but I think this will be a growing issue that China is going to become harder and harder to contain in East Asia throughout the year. I don't think this is the year where China takes over Taiwan, although I could see that happening in the next 10 years. I don't think the U.S. and the average American is willing to die for that. And all those issues around the South China Sea, conflicts with India, these are going to become more and more out of the reach of the United States to really dictate any sort of policy and to even necessarily be the major global partner. Now, I have no doubt that Biden will try to assert himself. And in fact, he should thank Trump in many ways. Although Trump has been unenthusiastic about starting new wars, he hasn't stopped prosecuting many of the existing ones. But he will be to blame for this extremely well-funded military that Biden will inherit, because Trump just threw hundreds of billions of dollars at the Pentagon and at the foreign policy establishment, which, sure, he withdrew some troops, but it just means all that money and all those resources are now sitting there for other politicians to use. And so that will encourage, I think, attempts to try and assert U.S. power again. But I think the ship has really sailed on a lot of that. I think China, Russia, Germany, these countries are no longer looking to the United States to really be the global dictator of policy and to really decide what's going to happen in terms of pipelines and shipping lanes and which regimes are allowed to exist. And those days are, I think, pretty much over. And you could see that even under Obama when they decided that, well, we have to put boots on the ground now in Syria and do a full-scale invasion. But that failed. The American public wasn't willing to go along with that. And the U.S. is in an even weaker position now than it was then. And that's likely to continue, especially as the economic problems of the shutdowns and the whole COVID panic become more apparent.
I think one of the really interesting tests with Biden is going to be to see what happens on any future movement with kind of the aftermath of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict with Armenia and Azerbaijan, because that was kind of interesting because here you had an active war zone erupt and like America really kind of played a behind the scenes player. Turkey was very big on it on one side. Russia had to play the mitigating force. There's the view has kind of been like, oh, well, Trump has taken America out of this thing. Is Biden going to try to find an international episode to reintroduce American leadership in the stage in all the ways that we typically do not like, ways that do not end well for American citizens. So that will be, I think, a very interesting early test on that front.
All right. Number 4 is your prediction. You predict that Trump will be deplatformed. And I get the sense that you don't think that's just no big deal.
Correct. Yeah, no, I think it's going to be very interesting because obviously one of the things that I'm definitely betting on is that Trump is going to continue to say that the election was fraudulent, and I think that him and his supporters, there's plenty of things that they're going to point to that are never going to be properly addressed and dealt with. I think that McConnell's actually trying to put in a little rider on the COVID vote on this point of kind of creating a commission, which the commission would actually probably work to Biden's favor because the commission's going to come in and defend the narrative, and then people are going to be saying, "Oh, well, look, even Mitch McConnell's commission on the election and proves that Trump was wrong," right? So that I think that's actually going to work against Trump's interest, and very quickly that will get him thrown off Twitter. You're going to have all these things. Hey, why is Twitter hosting seditionist rhetoric from former President Trump? Right? He'll be kicked off, and I think that's going to be very interesting because again, one of the things that they're looking to try to bundle in this issue is Section 230 protections, which I think that libertarians are very bad in the way that they usually talk about that issue, and that because they're kind of dismissive of the concerns and seem to kind of really relish protecting the rights of social media companies to silence their critics. There's consequences to the body politic if you start silencing certain viewpoints that go against the official narrative. Trump being deplatformed, I think, is going to end up being a major revolutionary moment in terms of the power structure of social media, providing a really kind of that last little push for a mass abandonment of at least one platform. Perhaps I'm being a little optimistic on that point, but I think Trump leaving Twitter or getting kicked off Twitter could end up sparking a lot of very interesting changes in the way that we consume information in this social media age.
All right. Well, my next prediction is that the federal deficit will continue to skyrocket. Perhaps not a risky prediction, perhaps not something that you weren't expecting to happen already. However, I just want to be crystal clear that we shouldn't expect too much from this notion of gridlock really bringing an end to what happened during the Trump years. Now, in articles we've done at Mises.org, we've shown in the past that the actually worst periods in terms of runaway spending are when Republicans have total control of Washington. This occurred in the middle of the Bush years, and it occurred for a period under Trump. And in both those cases, we found that whenever the Republicans have the presidency, the House, and the Senate, all bets are off, and it's just full speed ahead in terms of spending. Gridlock doesn't offer a big relief from that. It's less bad when you have a mixed government, but it certainly doesn't have any large effect in terms of limiting federal spending. And so especially now, given the realities of bailouts And the fact that there's really no restraints left on the Fed, on Congress, on the notion that, yep, we can just print up another $1 trillion. We'll have another $1 trillion bailout. We looked at last year, 2020's fiscal year deficit was $3.1 trillion. This is just amazingly huge, far beyond what had occurred before. And will it be that big this year? It will be stunning if it is, or is over $2 trillion again. But it easily could be over $2 trillion. And if that's the case, that'll be really just an astounding run, especially to have 2 years in a row of such immense spending. Because you did have something similar in 2009, just as Bush was leaving office. One of his final horrid acts was to support all sorts of bailouts and so on at that time. And then that played out through 2009. But then you saw spending really come down a bit and stabilize after that. Now, of course, it didn't go down to where it had been prior to 2009, but it flattened out. Let's put it that way. But I don't see any end in sight to very, very high spending going on right now, and there's really no reason for it to stop. Certainly the public has lost any interest in being deficit hawkish, and if you're an old man like me, you remember that back during the 1990s, this was a real issue where people were running on the issue of deficit reduction and so on. Nobody does that anymore. And in fact, now when I see people pipe up to say that, oh, well, you can't give people $2,000 checks, only give them $600 checks because, well, that would just add so much to the deficit or the federal budget. You're just like, really? I mean, this is where you draw the line is you were okay with last year's $3 trillion deficit, but now the $2,000 per person, which would add about $500 billion more, that's too much. So it just seems that everybody's got these totally malleable ideas of where the principle is, where the line in the sand is. But I mean, really, what's the standard? Because everyone in Washington, except for a small handful of people like Thomas Massie and so on, or maybe Rand Paul, are really just, they're going to vote because they think it'll get them reelected. And possibly that's a correct assertion of the situation in most congressional districts. And there's just no reason to expect that to change. And will that implode in 2021? I don't think that'll be the case either. I think you'll just continue to see massive spending. You'll add another few trillion to the overall national debt, and you'll see a lot of asset inflation. You're going to see increases in inequality because these deficits will require lots of printing of new dollars. Those dollars are going to go to hedge fund people, to bond brokers, to big banks, and they're going to benefit immensely. The stock prices are going to go way, way up. Even though people can't even make their house payments, we're seeing real estate prices continue to skyrocket. And you probably then see, to a lesser extent, increases in consumer prices as well. And so the cost of living will inch up in terms of food, but it'll really go up in terms of housing. Investing will be very, very difficult, and middle-class savers will continue to be punished heartily. Meanwhile, of course, small businesses won't be able to get loans because the whole economy now, in order to finance those deficits, is going to be geared toward low interest rates for the wealthy, but middle class and poor people will be considered high risk, and so they'll be paying much, much higher interest, assuming they can get loans at all, because the real money's now in just at the high end and in the financialized economy that favors a certain type of Wall Street person who really has no connection at all to the larger Main Street economy. So get ready for a lot of deficit-fueled inequality growing, lots of headlines about how billionaires are making just immense amounts of money, which really means their stock prices that they own, the prices of the stock they own are going way, way up. And that will continue well into 2021. It will be essentially the Japanification of the U.S. economy will continue. Lots of easy money, lots of inflation. But in the meantime, people are going to be really having to scramble to keep up in terms of their standard of living if they're just regular people.
And that kind of goes into my last prediction, which is that the price of Bitcoin will be higher in December 2021 than it is in December 2020. Again, and this is not just an American issue. I think this is one of the things that is why I always enjoy whenever Daniel Lacalle writes anything, because he does a great job of placing an international perspective that all of the issues that we have with the U.S. are often mirrored, if not even increased, with Europe and other countries. I mean, China has some of the highest credit expansion in the last 10 years of any country out there. But it's okay. All their official data says that they actually grew this year. We can definitely trust that. Um, so you're going to have this global increase of continuing spending, continuing money creation, credit expansion, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that therefore the response from an average people into non-fiat assets like Bitcoin, which is now enjoying not simply the benefit of the headwinds of financial irresponsibility, which is always tended to benefit it, but is now seeing massive benefit from large-scale institutions. You have massive insurance companies. You have various asset holding companies that are changing out their cash holdings for crypto. I think that's a trend that will continue. We just had Russell Okun, who tackle from the Carolina Panthers. He just got half of his NFL paycheck in Bitcoin yesterday. Time of recording. I think that could end up having interesting consequences in the forward. I mean, like it is not that unrealistic that by let's say the start of the NFL season next year, we'll be able to look back and see that Russell Okun is actually the best compensated player in the 2020 season because he ended up parking half of his salary in Bitcoin. And if that ends up being the case, if that ends up being a narrative, I think that's going to end up having very interesting consequences on the sports end, which has influence on the cultural end. Reaching people that perhaps would otherwise not read, let's say, Safety Amos's Bitcoin Standard, which was the book that got Russell Okun into this. Which means that since Saifedean was a fan of Joe Salerno and Russell Okun is a fan of Saifedean, then we can basically say that Russell Okun reads Salerno, basically. Which I think is very exciting. So I think all of these reasons are why I think crypto is going to continue to do extremely well. I would love to have $2,000. If you're going to have this insane spending deal, might as well make it $2,000 rather than $600, because at least it gives average Americans the ability of opting out of this dying financial clown world. Dying is the wrong word. We wish it was dying, but this increasingly absurd clown world of government-controlled currency. Allow more people to perhaps have an exit route, which I think is so important. So that's definitely what I will be doing should that ends up being successful. Which again just creates some very interesting opportunities going forward. And I also think just populist politics, which has been so interesting in various countries, not just the Trumpening, but elsewhere. I think populist politics is increasingly going to be ending up focusing on the monetary issue, because when you do continue to have concerns with various central banks, I think the IMF trying to step in and to take this growing trend of digital central bank currency, which China is continuing on. I know the U.S. is looking at it. I know Europe's looking at it. I think that's going to be where do you win the heart and soul of the people? Will the people choose the IMF digital currency, or will they choose private digital currency? I think that the people will end up choosing the stuff that the IMF does not control, which means that in order for these very, very powerful rooms to be able to have the leverage and power that they have had and enjoyed for many, many decades now, they will try to amplify their war on privately held money. And again, there's plenty of history of this. The war on gold was a war on private money. The war on cash today is a war on private money. And I think the war on crypto going forward, even though countries like China and Russia have not been able to censor Bitcoin, only been able to stranglehold exchanges, I think that is going to increasingly be a very interesting policy battle. There's already kind of talks now that Mnuchin's going to try to push in something on crypto exchanges before he gets out of there. That would be very bad. So I think that's going to be one of those things to watch, is how crypto in the state will be one of those important narratives for 2021.
Yeah, I think the fact that institutional money is starting to go into crypto is an important development, because I think it adds a political dimension there that wasn't there before. If you had just a bunch of weirdos, for lack of a better term, putting their money into Bitcoin, it's easy to use the power of the state to just get rid of that. However, when you've got wealthy Wall Street types who've got some money parked in there, then it's a lot less likely that Congress just decides or federal regulators just decide, well, this is an annoyance to us, and we're going to make it extremely difficult to use this. And ironically, the Fed brought a lot of that development about. Doug French on Mises.org had a column talking about how the Fed's inflationist policies and the fact that it's causing such a starvation for yield, and people are searching anywhere where they can get what looks like a decent asset. This pushes people into crypto. And so the Fed was even fueling then this search for something new, for something different. And there's of course, then all this new cash and money sloshing around too, and it's got to go somewhere. And a lot of it went to Bitcoin. And so and that'll be the great irony, if it was the Fed ended up pushing a bunch of that rich guy's money into crypto that ends up saving it from a political demise. That may end up blowing up in their faces, perhaps. Now, obviously, they're trying to dilute that as power by creating their own digital currencies and so on. But that may not have the effect they intend.
And one point to this thing in terms of trying to, again, really increase the amount of powerful stakeholders in monetary freedom is essentially what this comes down to. I know that I've talked to at least one a state legislator out there that does listen to the show. One thing that that every single person and every state legislator out there should be trying to bring on the table discussions on how state and municipal governments can park cash, can park their revenues. Because Wyoming's already done this. Wyoming allows municipal governments to actually park some of their savings into cryptocurrency. It was the first one out there. I looked at it like Florida. Florida, you cannot. There's all sorts of limitations on what municipal governments can invest in. One of the things I thought was kind of interesting is that you can invest in both U.S. government debt and Israeli debt, which I think is just a great example of a strong voting base in Florida, kind of having some interesting say on financial investment there. If you start getting municipal governments, you start getting state governments holding cryptocurrency, it will make it harder for the feds to crack down on that, or at least create some different incentive structures there. And I mean, we've already kind of seen this on the gold side, right? Texas doing gold bank. You've had various other states kind of focus on gold aspect, kind of using some of the constitutional language, empowering states on that end. The more that we can get people in power on that issue, that all makes it difficult to crack down in ways that matter going forward. So that's one thing that I'm going to be trying to get in the ears of people here in the free state of Florida, and that's something that I think is just a kind of an interesting state policy aspect on something as. And we don't typically think of it on a state lens. We usually think on a federal or even a global lens. I think that is one little interesting kind of policy point that can help this larger battle.
Looking back over our predictions, it seems that maybe if I could identify a theme here, would be that 2021 is the year that a lot of the new issues that became evident in 2020 really really flower into full-blown issues. That it's really just the opening volley of shots on a lot of these issues, right? Over lockdowns, that issue isn't anywhere near resolved. A lot of these foreign policy issues that just started under Trump. What does that mean in a new administration? Will these things have staying power? Will they go away quickly? And I think 2021 is the year where a lot of that will be decided. And then ultimately in 2022 with the midterm election, if there's a real repudiation of certain things, I think we'll see it then. And so that maybe will be the more of the end game to some of these short-term trends that are going on. But yeah, if you're exhausted from fighting the good fight in 2020, I got bad news. You got a whole year of it ahead of you, because it doesn't seem to be going anywhere.
Yeah, all that optimism, but I just can't wait to get through this year. Like 2021 can't be any worse. Like, maybe it can. I think one thing that will be an upgrade is that I think that politics could become even more entertaining. Again, the idea of Donald Trump free of governing responsibilities, being camped out in Florida, just dunking on the Biden administration from another social media platform could have all sorts of very interesting entertainment aspects. Though I have one personal question, right? For me, my resolutions are to continue stacking sats, and one of my big personal goals is to find a church in my community. What do you have any New Year's resolutions planned yet for the coming year?
Oh, I never make New Year's resolutions. Nothing's even it didn't even occur to me. I should. To keep my job. That's always like a pretty important one. Really, of course, I've got these book projects I got to finish up. After I got all these great books to read for Christmas, I just realized I'm never going to get to read these until I finish up these other projects. So, yes, that's got to be finished up this year, and then we can move on to some other issues. But until then, it's going to be a long, hard slog through some of these editing projects. So that's really my New Year's resolution, is to wrap up all this in the next 90 days. And then I think you start to see a whole bunch of new stuff from me on economic history, I think, on the site is really the goal. So we'll see how that goes. I got lots of big plans, and they always seem to take longer than I hoped.
We have a lot to look forward to in 2021, just perhaps not on the economic end.
Well, we're going to have to wrap it up there, I think. And if we're right with these predictions, this episode should be basically a preview of the topics we're going to have to return to again and again throughout 2021. If we're wrong, well, I suppose we'll be surprised, and 2021 was nothing if not chock full of surprises. So until next time, thank you for listening to Radio Rothbard, and have a wonderful day.